Good morning and welcome to Rising. We have a great show for you today. As always, I'm Amber Duke back at the desk with Bofta Yiman.
Good to be here.
And a happy Friday.
I know, and it's a wet, rainy Friday in the DMV. I know we need it, because it's been a scorcher, but man, I'm telling you, I was not looking forward to my weekend.
Yeah, could we have had the hot weather on the weekend and the rain during the week?
Yeah, yes, little switch.
Very unlucky. But also speaking of unlucky, President Trump held a big, beautiful event yesterday at the White House where he urged Congress to pass his budget bill with that July 4th deadline.
Here's part of what he said.
This is the ultimate codification of our agenda to, very simply, a phrase that's been used pretty well by me over the last 10 years, but maybe even before that, make America great again. Very simple, make America great again. I shouldn't say this, but we don't want to have grandstanders where one or two people raise their vote. We vote no, and they do it to grandstand, that's all. Not good people. They know who I'm talking about. I call them out, but we don't need grandstanders.
Meanwhile, some House Republicans are fuming over the Senate Parliamentarian's decision to take an axe to certain Medicare measures.
Elizabeth McDonough, the Senate Parliamentarian, ruled that the Senate's cap on healthcare provider taxes violates what's called the Byrd Rule. The Byrd Rule governs what bills can be passed with a simple majority and avoid a filibuster.
The cap would have sparked billions in savings to make up for Trump's tax cuts. McDonough also asked other key aspects of the bill related to education and regulations on gun suppressors and easily concealable firearms. Congressman Greg Steube wrote on X, "How is it that an unelected swamp bureaucrat who was appointed by Harry Reid over a decade ago gets to decide what can and cannot go in President Trump's one big, beautiful bill? It is time for our elected leaders to take back control. J.D. Vance should overrule the parliamentarian and let the will of the people, not some staffer hiding behind Senate procedure, determine the future of this country."
Democratic Senator Jeff Merkley praised the parliamentarian's ruling, writing in a statement, "Democrats are fighting back against Republicans' plans to gut Medicaid, dismantle the Affordable Care Act, and kick kids, veterans, seniors, and folks with disabilities off of their health insurance."
So obviously a big blow to the big, beautiful bill. And this July 4th deadline that the president set is looking more and more unlikely. Now, I don't think that they were necessarily going to meet that from the jump just because of how many concerns more fiscal conservative Republicans had about even the House version of the bill. But now that the Senate bill is getting gutted, it's going to be even harder when it gets back over to the other chamber for those individuals to get on board.
Yeah, I would agree. It's going to be difficult, right? And they're going to have to concede maybe on some of the sticking points that they have already talked about. I also think it's important to remind folks of the role of the Senate parliamentarian. Senate parliamentarian is nonpartisan. They interpret the rules. They are not there, every time you don't like something. And I think this is where we're getting into tricky waters. Let's get rid of this individual, right, who's there to really be the Senate's advisor. And so I think we're in tricky waters, big picture here. If we're telling the Senate parliamentarian every time we don't like something, your job is at stake. When that is your job, is to interpret the rules and then deliver, hey, this is what I'm interpreting and this is what you can and cannot do. And so I know that we can get back and forth into what's going to be in the bill, what isn't, and we'll know more as we get, toward July 4th. But I also think that there's really a challenge here that they're facing if they're threatening every time they don't like something.
Yeah, Senate Majority Leader John Thune made pretty clear that he's going to abide by the Senate parliamentarians' recommendations for the bill. Some of the rulings, though, were I thought, a little suspect. The Byrd Rule basically says that everything done through the reconciliation process has to relate directly to budget and spending issues. And some of these very clearly did, whether it was getting rid of Medicaid for non-citizens or getting rid of Medicaid coverage of things like sex changes for kids and some of the other provisions in the bill. The regulations on gun suppressors obviously is more able to be argued by the parliamentarian that that's not related to the budget. Some of these issues were. Several members of the Senate have since said that they are working on rewriting some of those provisions related to Medicaid and SNAP and other entitlement benefits in order to try to appease the Senate parliamentarian. But they have made clear that they're not planning on getting rid of her. It doesn't seem like Vance is going to step in and overrule her either, just based on what the majority leader has said publicly.
Right, and I do agree that it's likely not to happen, but I think that also putting the threat out there is also discouraging too. And it's setting precedent that we're just going to always go after the advisor, essentially, when we don't like something. But I agree that in the long run, more than likely, it's not going to happen and everyone's going to keep playing ball as they have. But I also think that there's going to be that issue with rural hospitals that will be impacted, that they're looking at right now. How much will rural hospitals be impacted based on state taxes, and getting into some of the nuances with Medicaid and how that process works. It will be interesting to see how folks who do have many rural communities within their jurisdictions vote on something like that that could impact and even close down some rural hospitals that are very much needed, and what their constituents will have to say about that. So I don't think they're rushing on that point either.
Yeah, and look, there's been arguments that senators are happy to have the parliamentarians strip some of these provisions out of the bill because it prevents them from having to make a potentially politically tricky vote on some of these issues related to their constituents. And so maybe they don't want to fight back against the parliamentarian because it's sort of an easy way for them to get out of voting on some hard things. Jody Arrington, who is the chair of the House Budget Committee, also confirmed that Republicans are trying to rewrite some of the provisions before it comes back to the House. But yeah, this is obviously going to delay things quite a bit. One of the other interesting things that I think is worth mentioning as it relates to McDonough is she was appointed by Harry Reid in 2012. Mm-hmm. The following year...
the first woman to be in the position. Just want to insert that, by the way, folks.
Good for her.
Yeah.
And then the following year, in 2013, Harry Reid, of course, got rid of the filibuster for judicial appointments, which was against the advice of the person that he had appointed to the parliamentarian position. She was also a policy advisor to John Kerry for some time. And this is not the first time that she has come under fire. As I mentioned, the Harry Reid issue, but later on during the Biden administration with the Inflation Reduction Act, there were several provisions that she recommended stripping from the bill because they violated the Byrd Rule, and Democrats called on then Vice President Kamala Harris to overrule the parliamentarian, and Kamala Harris declined to do so. So this is obviously an issue on both sides of people getting frustrated with the Senate parliamentarian, but so far she's been in the role at this point for 13 years. The Republicans seem clear that they're not going to violate that tradition.
Yeah, and I think that's good, like, solid points, right? That this has not always been, we're not just talking about the Republican Party who's going after the parliamentarian. I do think, yeah, Democrats have done it too. That's why I think we have to be careful about, the threats and setting precedent, because it is the Senate's advisor. On a broader scope, what is at stake, do you think, if this does not go the way Trump plans? Because this is the bulk of his domestic agenda inside of this tax and spending package, or he calls it the big beautiful bill, right? But what's at stake here, do you think? I mean, politically.
Yeah, I mean, this is set to be the landmark legislation of his administration, of his presidency. If this doesn't get passed, he's in big trouble. He's done a lot of things through executive orders, which have been challenged in the courts, a lot of them still subject to nationwide injunctions. The best way to codify a lot of these policies is through legislation that goes through Congress. And whether it's stripping healthcare from illegal immigrants or stripping funding to Planned Parenthood, or a lot of this bill has to do with funding for border security and immigration policy, defunding sanctuary cities. That is a huge part of what he ran on. So if he's not able to get that done legislatively, that will be very damaging for his ability, one, in the midterms, and then two, whoever his successor is running in 2028, to make the case that his presidency was a successful one.
Yeah, I think that he will, for the sake of everything you just mentioned, he probably will push this July 4th deadline. Of course, he wants it on July 4th with, all of the significance the day holds and the holiday holds. But the chances of it passing at this point on July 4th, it's slim based on all the back and forth that we've seen just in the past even 48 hours. It feels like there's always something coming down. We will be talking about Congressman Massey, and he's one of the folks you heard in Trump's soundbite who's really been pushing
the
back.
grandstander.
Yeah, the grandstander. Right. So we'll be talking about that a little bit later in the show. Coming up next, though, President Trump thinks certain reporters from the New York Times and CNN should be fired. Is that new? Yeah, we've heard that story before, but it's happening again. More on that coming up.